What's going on, guys? This is Martyrs Brigade 99 coming to you once again with another session of Dark Souls PvP. Alright guys, we're back at it again for a two-part series that I like to title Just Another Day in the Forest. And basically there's nothing fancy about this two-part series. It's just going to be part one, wherein I'm using strength weapons, and part two I will be using my 40-40 quality build. Alright, now I know in the past when I've talked about using strength weapons, the vast majority of the time I would be using the Black Knight Halberd, and mainly because I just like the weapon. I think it looks classy, and I mean it hits pretty good, and you know, when you use it one-handed it will still leave your left hand free for parries, whereas some of these other weapons, you know, they're a little more awkward and you can't really parry as quickly as you can with a weapon like this. Alright, so and in the past wherein I've been using a lot of the Black Knight Halberd, actually in part one of this video I will, the vast majority of the time, I mean I think this might be the only scene where I'm using it. The vast majority of the time I'm not even using it. So I'm going to go ahead and mix it up a little bit with weapons that I rarely use. Alright, so let's see, what do we have here? Alright, so it looks like we have a host and a phantom. No big deal, right? Not a big deal at all. Now, one thing I will say, I'll probably forest hunt more than anything, right? Because as much as some people may hate the forest, I mean, like I've said in the past, for some of the reasons that you hate it, I mean, are some of the same reasons that I just can't stay away from it, right? Yes, it's annoying when you have guys who are, I mean, just destroying you, but it is so satisfying when you're able to defeat at least two phantoms. So satisfying. And I think that's one of the other things that help keeps the game exciting, in my opinion. Because, I mean, think about it. This game has been out since third quarter 2011. And we're approaching the second quarter of 2013. And I've had this game since day one. Right? But when you have, you know, so many things that you can do, right? You can go strictly PvE. You can do basically PvE, just all co-op with a buddy. You can do formal setup matches. You can do random invasions. And in the instance of the forest, you can basically just gank. I mean, there's so many different things that you can do, so many choices, so many different varieties, that, I mean, I think that's one of the main reasons why I still play the game, right? Because you can never really get bored. I mean, unless you know, are one of these guys, you just get frustrated with the whole game dynamics. You're frustrating with the, you know, you get frustrated with losing. Unless you're one of those guys, I really don't see how anyone could get bored with Dark Souls, and that's probably why this is just about the only game that I play. Now, I have been kind of looking into other games, and you know, some of the games that I've been looking into, it's kind of like they're so one-dimensional that I don't really see, you know, after playing it once I will still be interested in playing. Case in point, shout out to all the Xbox users. I just picked up Gears of War not too long ago. And you know, Gears of War is cool. Right? And I think it's part 4 or something, the one that just came out a few weeks ago. Gears of War is cool. And granted, this is my first Gears of War game, because actually I just picked up an Xbox like the day after Christmas. So I'm not even familiar with any of the Xbox titles. But I do know the Gears of War is one of the more popular ones. So I picked up the game, and I think after a couple hours of playing it, and actually I picked up Gears of War the day that it came out, right? I checked out some of the reviews. I already knew about some of the previous Gears of War games and knew that it was one of those popular titles. But after playing it for like a couple hours, I just got bored. I don't know why. I think basically my time is running out as far as video games are concerned, because I get bored very easily. Very easily. And as a matter of fact, I think after Dark Souls 2, and I think there's one other title that I'm basically a fan of, and that's the Killzone franchise. After Killzone 4 is released, and after the Dark Souls 2 game is released, I think I'll be retiring from video games, because none of these games really keep my interest, right? And I think that's another testimony to how good Dark Souls is, in my personal opinion. Like I said before, this game has been out since the fourth quarter of 2011. This is the second quarter of 2013, and I still play the game all the time, right? And like I said before, that's just because there's so many things going on with this game, so many things to learn, so many combinations, so many tactics, so many techniques. And that's, you can kind of argue that about PvE, right? Because think about it. Shout out to Epic Name, bro. That guy has the lore going on for the most part, and he's bigger on PvE than he is on PvP. But think about how many people are interested in the things that he talks about just concerning PvE. Now, we're not talking about whether you're a PvE fan or not. We're not talking about that. What I'm saying is, there's so many people interested in the lore, in the engine, all by itself. I mean, just one upload from him just doing PvE and talking about, the specifics about the item description or just certain mechanics in the game. He has so many people interested in what he's talking about. And that's just PvE. We're not going to even talk about PvP. Right? And basically just the basics of PvE will keep you interested. Let alone learning all these, what you might call advanced techniques. So this was a game that was very well put together. And as a matter of fact, I think if I had to change anything about this game, I think I would return the great sword speed the way it was prior to 1.06, because even though you could get stun locked a lot faster, those guys were not invincible. Because if you guys watch any videos prior to the most recent patch, I used to parry those guys on the second swing all the time. So those guys weren't invincible. Now, was it a lot harder to resist and a lot easier to get stun locked? Yes, it was. But I think the great sword swing speed, there was nothing wrong with it, nothing at all. So I think if I had to do anything about this game, that would be the only thing that I would change. I would just go ahead and return the swing speed, but everything else, for the most part, I would keep the same. Well, actually, let me take that back. I would definitely do something about this ridiculous Gravelord Covenant, because outside of getting Eyes of Deaths, what's the real incentive? Now, I know somebody will say, well, the incentive is you get a more powerful Gravelord, Great Lord dance. Okay, so you get a stronger fancy miracle that rarely hits. Okay, that's not really a huge incentive, but okay. So those would be the two things that I would do. I will greatly improve the Gravelord Covenant, and in addition to that, I would return the swing speed of the great swords. But besides those two changes, this game is awesome. Despite the complaints, the personal complaints that we all have, just looking at the game for what it is overall, I think this game is awesome. Now, looking into Dark Souls 2, there's something I haven't really talked about it, but there's basically been no new information lately, so I guess I could talk about a few things with regard to Dark Souls 2. Me personally, what would I want in Dark Souls 2? Number one, I would want the world tendencies to return. Black and all white world tendencies. Now, for you guys that are not familiar with Demon Souls, World tendencies basically controlled, to a degree, the difficulty of the game. All right, now there was a continuum between pure black and pure white world tendency. Pure white world tendency would make the game easier. Now the game wasn't a piece of cake on pure white, but it was a lot more easier than pure black. Pure white world tendency made the game easier. The enemies hit for less, they had less HP. So, therefore they were easier to defeat, bosses included. And like I said, they were no piece of cake, but it was a lot easier when you compare against the pure black world tendency. The enemies were a lot easier, but some of the rare items, like to the extent that you had to farm, were a lot harder to get. A lot harder to get on pure white world tendency. On the other hand, pure black world tendency made the game much harder. And actually you would get red phantoms on pure black. And in addition to that, whenever you had to farm items, because it was so hard and the enemies were, a lot harder than what they would be on pure white world tendency, you could farm items and get a better result. Right, so in other words, the frequency would be increased when you compare it to the two. And it basically went from neutral to kind of white, more white, white, and then it would be pure white. And the same will be said for going in the pure black direction, right? It would be neutral, then it would be kind of grayish, darker than gray, but not really black, and then pure black. And that would be basically the continuum. So I think that worked well. Also for Dark Souls 2, I hope they get rid of these ridiculous bonfires. I don't know. For some of you guys that are not used to Demon Souls, you may think to yourself, look dude, the game was hard enough. That's ridiculous. We need bonfires. I think that's one of the things that made Demon Souls so awesome. When you lost, regardless of how difficult the stage may have been, you started all the way to the beginning. All the way at the beginning you had to start. And although it was frustrating and it made the game the more difficult, I think that was a cool thing. Right? That was definitely cool. Case in point, for a lot of you guys that may be familiar with Demon Souls, stage, I think it's 5.1, 5-1. Dude, I had to replay that board so many times because you had these little dredgeling looking zombie type things. Those guys would gang up on you and you would be finished. But that's what made the game, so good. PvE was wonderful in Demon Souls. Now granted, I may not necessarily like the PvP in Demon Souls. All the vets will tell you how great it was in comparison to Dark Souls, but my opinion is a lot different because for the most part, backstabs were horrible looking. Now you guys notice this? You guys notice that lag? I was 100%. I had avoided that thing totally, but somehow I still received damage from that magic casting. That's one of the things that I hate about castings in this game. You can be obviously, you could have obviously avoided a magic casting and still get inflicted with damage, and that really annoys me. But it is what it is. No game is perfect. Alright, so I guess they have to kill me with the tranquil walk because they couldn't do anything else despite it being two of them. So it is what it is. But anyway, like I was saying, a lot of people will tell you how wonderful Demon Souls, was, but the game was horrible as far as PvP is concerned, in my personal opinion. And like I said, all the vets will tell you how wonderful it was and how perfect it was and how Dark Souls should be just like, how the PvP in Dark Souls should have been just like Demon Souls. There may be some things that I prefer in Demon Souls. In Demon Souls over Dark Souls. But overall, in my personal opinion, the PvP in Dark Souls is a whole lot better than what it was in Demon Souls. Number one, backstabs look a lot better. Now I know there are some instances where you just get such a laggy backstab that it may infuriate you. But overall, when you just look at generally speaking, just like right here, you see that at least the backstab connects, right? It's not some super laggy looking thing, right? Now, if I were to do some PvP on Demon Souls, I would say probably about 80% of them look laggy. As a matter of fact, maybe even a higher percentage than that. And it was just ugly. It was so ugly the way those backstabs used to connect, you know. So when Dark Souls came out and I saw the backstabs, I'm like, holy crap. I mean, at least it looks like it's connecting. At least the lag is not as bad as what it was in Demon Souls. Another thing, parries are a lot more realistic in this game. It was super difficult to parry in Demon Souls. Now, I'm not saying it was impossible, right? Because I was able to parry in Demon Souls. But what I'm saying is, it was a lot more difficult when you compare the two. And it just didn't even connect well. At least on this game, when I'm able to have a successful parry, you can look at it in some case. And actually, this is another reason why I use the special shields, right? Because I know a lot of people ask me, like, dude, why do you use the buckler? When I parry with a special shield, when I look at it on screen, it just looks like it connects better than what it would with a medium shield. And I can parry with both, so I know a lot of you guys with medium shields know what I'm talking about. With medium shields, you basically have to, when you look at the animation of a parry with a medium shield, your weapon is basically getting parried against a shield that's in the open motion, right? And I know that's kind of weird when you hear it, but next time you guys with a medium shield, you guys are checking out a parry, just notice, now in my mind, you should be parrying against the back of the shield, not with the shield being in the open motion and basically your katana is bouncing against that. I mean, because think about it, that would be your arm kind of, right? But with the medium shield, that's basically what it looks like. Now, to the person who's being parried, it looks like you parried on time, right? It looks like you parried against the back of a shield. And I've noticed this because in my videos, I have seen when people would parry me, right? When you guys would notice, and I mean, you guys should check out some of my old videos when I would get parried. It would look like they did a perfect parry, but on their screen, they basically had to parry before, and basically, my weapon hit against their open shield. Now, the reason why I like special shields is because it just feels more natural. It looks natural. Now I know some people will say, well, you get a few extra milliseconds, hundreds of a millisecond or so, whatever the timing is. That's not really anything to me, because at the end of the day, you have a longer recovery, right? And the timing is the same. I can parry just as well with a medium shield as I can with a special shield. The only reason why I prefer, actually not the only reason, there's two reasons. I like the way the buckler looks, right? I think it looks better. And when I parry, it just looks more natural, not only on my screen, but on the person who's getting parried screen. Because if you guys would notice, when I'm parrying someone with a special shield, it looks like I'm parrying nearly at the same time that they're swinging, which is a lot different than how the parry appears on the medium shields. So those are the two reasons, right? Because I still, to this day, I still get a lot of guys asking, like, dude, why do you use those special shields? I mean, they're weak, instability sucks. I mean, not instability, the stability sucks. The stats are down. I mean, you don't even get 100% physical reduction. So why do you use them? Well, I mean, I just think the parries look and feel a little more natural. and I think the buckler looks more classy, so that's why I use it over the target shield. All right, so enough about that. So like I said before, if it were up to me, oh, here's another thing about Dark Souls 2. If it were up to me, I would not have dedicated servers. I would not have dedicated servers. Now, for a lot of these guys that like to attack Japanese players for every single thing, and I'm basically talking about some of these community groups, and you guys know what I'm talking about to the extent that you have visited them. Now, I know you guys like to blame them for everything negative. Well, some of you guys, I can't say you guys, but I listen to the streams and I listen to the language that you guys use. I don't really experience that much laggier PvP against Japanese players than what I do against any other player. Now, I'm not saying I never experience laggy play against Japanese players or people from Japan. I'm not saying it's never laggy. But is it as laggy as people will try to make you think? Not in my experience. Right? I've played against plenty of Japanese players, and they're not just warping around me. I mean, the thing is, their definition of competitive play is a lot different than our definition. Or, I won't say our definition, I'll say the so-called community's definition of competitive play. In other words, their definition of competitive play is killing your opponent as fast as you can. Whereas the so-called community's established definition of competitive play concentrate more around tactics than one-shot, one-kill techniques. And I can kind of agree with that. I can understand. Right? But it is not to say that the Japanese are more try-hard. They just have a different definition. That's the only thing that makes them different. So when you lose to them, in a lot of cases, I've seen people just say, oh, look at the laggy Japanese, they're this and they're that. It's like, look, dude, you just lost. I mean, that's it. I mean, if they're using Hornet rings, they use the Hornet ring. And in some cases, when you see these guys, like in most cases, now I will admit, whenever I get beaten by like 3v1s in the forest, or I see guys, well, I mean, they just popping out the Tranquil, or they'll have that trademark Mask of the Mother, Havel's chest plate, you know, with a club and a Hornet ring. It is true that most of the time they are the Japanese guys, but like I said, I just think their definitions are different. Definitions of what competitive play is. And why would I say that? I've checked out Japanese streams. I think it's like Nico or something like that. And some of them, they play a lot more vicious than some of us would. As a matter of fact, by our definition, they would all be, well, I can't even say they would all be tryhards, because I've actually run into a whole bunch of Japanese who will go zero poise, and they will toggle switch out of just about everything. Right? So in other words, I think their standards of gameplay is just about as diverse as ours. But because a lot of people just have something against their gameplay, they will only focus on the what you might call try-hard builds, but they will ignore the guys who will basically go zero poise on you, right? Or less than optimized stats. They will ignore those players, but they will just talk about the try-hard, or what you might call so-called try-hard. But going back to the point of the conversation, I do not want dedicated servers. One of the main reasons why we have so many players and can find PvP as often as we can is because we have the Japanese players, unlike the Xbox version of Dark Souls. Because remember, guys, I have both. And there's so many times where I'm in the forest and it is so dead, I can't get an invasion for anything. And when I finally get an invasion, it's only a lone host. I can't get gankers. Now, you can't say this about PlayStation. I don't care what time of the day. It could be first thing in the morning. It could be anything. I will always find players and it is almost never dead. Now, I might not get as rapid invasions, right, based upon what time of the day, but it will never be a time where there's basically a lack of invasions, unlike the Xbox. And I think that has something to do largely with the so-called the servers that we have. People on Xbox can't, I mean, Japanese, they don't have as many Japanese players as we do, and I think mainly because most Japanese players, at least the ones who are in Japan, do not have an Xbox. Most of them probably have a PlayStation, which is good with me. You know, the way I see it, you know, if they are more what you might call try hard, it will just cause for you to increase your tactics. Well, not increase, but improve your tactics. But basically, I think a lot of that, what you might call Japanese player hate, comes from some more of the competitive guys, right? When you're one of those 1v1 competitive type dudes, I mean, you look at things totally different than what you would look at if you were kind of like me. I like random invasions. So, you know, the way I see things may be a lot different than how some of these other guys see things who only like 1v1s. Because if you're only, like I've said in the past, if you look at things with a competitive eye, you will look at things in terms of fairness and not fairness, right? Because you're looking at a set of rules or a certain format that you assume everyone should play by. Well, actually, we're kind of running out of time in part one, so we'll finish this discussion a little bit in part two. So that'll be the end of part one. Until next time, Martyrs Brigade.